You're still unemployed? At your age? My sister Natalie's voice cut through the Sunday dinner conversation like a blade, her perfectly manicured finger pointing at me across our parents' mahogany dining table. The entire family turned to stare at me, Mom, Dad, my brother Derek, his wife Amanda, even their twin boys who were supposed to be focused on their chicken nuggets. Maybe it's time to accept that some people just aren't cut out for success, Vanessa. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I sat there in my thrift store blazer, the one I'd worn to 17 job interviews in the past 3 months, watching my family's faces transform from polite dinner conversation to barely concealed pity. The chandelier above us, the one Dad had installed after his promotion to regional manager, cast shadows that seemed to highlight every disappointment in their expressions. Now, Natalie, Mom said, though her tone suggested she agreed, Vanessa is trying her best. The word trying hung in the air like an accusation. She dabbed her lips with the cloth napkin, the same way she'd done when I was 12 and had to explain why I'd failed my piano recital. Derek leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight. I could probably get you something entry-level at my firm, he offered, his voice dripping with the condescension that came naturally to someone who'd inherited Dad's sales territory. Nothing fancy, mind you. Maybe filing, data entry. Minimum wage to start, but it's honest work. The irony wasn't lost on me. Derek, who'd struggled through community college and needed Dad's connections to land his first job, was offering me charity. The same Derek who still borrowed money from our parents for his mortgage payments was positioning himself as my savior. I appreciate the offer, I said quietly, cutting into my pot roast, Mom's Sunday special that I'd been eating at this same table for 28 years. But I'm looking for something more aligned with my experience. Amanda, Derek's wife, let out a small laugh. Experience in what? Getting fired? She immediately covered her mouth, feigning embarrassment. Sorry, that came out wrong. I just meant, maybe you should consider lowering your expectations. Not everyone can be CEO material. The dining room fell silent except for the grandfather clock in the corner, the one that had belonged to my late grandmother Elizabeth. Tick, tick, tick. Each sound marking another second of my apparent failure. Dad cleared his throat, the way he always did before delivering what he considered wisdom. Vanessa, sweetheart, your mother and I have been talking. You're 32 years old. Most people your age have established careers, families, mortgages. You're living in that tiny apartment, driving that old Honda. He gestured vaguely toward the window where my 12-year-old Civic sat next to Derek's brand new BMW and Natalie's leased Mercedes. What your father is trying to say, Mom interjected, her voice taking on that tone she'd used when I'd announced I was majoring in philosophy instead of business, is that maybe it's time to be realistic about your prospects. Natalie has her marketing agency, Derek has his sales position, and you, well, you have potential. Potential. The word I'd been hearing my entire life. Potential meant unfulfilled. Potential meant disappointment waiting to happen. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Natalie leaned forward, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the light. I mean, how long can you keep this up? The job searching, the rejections, the excuses? At some point, don't you think the universe is trying to tell you something? What's the universe trying to tell me, Natalie? I asked, setting down my fork with deliberate precision. That maybe you're not as special as you think you are. Her words landed like physical blows. Look, I'm not trying to be mean. I'm trying to be honest. We all are. You've been between opportunities for what, 4 months now? That's not bad luck. That's a pattern. Derek nodded sagely, as if Natalie had just delivered the wisdom of Solomon. She's right, Ness. Maybe it's time to consider that the corporate world just isn't for you. There's no shame in finding your level. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My level. As if success was a ladder with predetermined rungs, and I'd somehow been assigned to the bottom ones. The Peterson girl, Mom said suddenly, referring to our neighbor's daughter, she just got promoted to assistant manager at that insurance company. And she's 2 years younger than you. Sweet girl, very practical. Maybe you could learn something from her approach. I looked around the table at these people who shared my DNA, who'd raised me, who claimed to love me, and felt something crack inside my chest. Not break, crack. Like ice on a lake in early spring, holding firm but showing the first signs of what was coming. You know what? I said, reaching into my purse and pulling out a folded piece of paper I'd been carrying for 3 days. You're absolutely right. I should be more realistic about my situation. The paper was crisp, official, bearing the letterhead of Whitmore and Associates Trust Management. The numbers at the bottom seemed to glow in the dining room light, $89,247,652.33. But I didn't unfold it. Not yet. Instead, I smiled, the first genuine smile I'd worn in their presence in months. Thank you all for this intervention. It's exactly what I needed to hear. 3 days later, Derek would be calling me at 6 a.m., his voice shaking. Vanessa, Mom just told me something crazy about a trust fund. Please tell me there's been some kind of mistake. But that afternoon, sitting at our parents' dinner table while my family dissected my failures like pathologists examining a corpse, I simply finished my pot roast, complimented Mom on the seasoning, and let them believe they knew everything about my life. Sometimes the most powerful response to being underestimated is simply letting people continue to underestimate you. Until you're ready to show them exactly how wrong they've been. The intervention didn't end with dinner. It never did in the Morrison family. Success was a religion here, and failure required an extended sermon. Dad had moved us to the living room, positioning himself in his leather recliner like a judge presiding over court. Mom busied herself serving coffee in her good china, the set she'd inherited from grandmother Elizabeth, the same grandmother whose inheritance had changed everything for me, though they'd never know that part. Vanessa, sit down, Dad said, patting the couch cushion beside him. The same couch where I'd received countless lectures over the years. Bad grades, missed curfews, choosing philosophy over pre-law. Now unemployment was just the latest in a long list of disappointments. Natalie had claimed the matching armchair, crossing her legs in that practiced way she'd learned in her sorority. Her Louboutin heels, the red-soled ones she posted about on Instagram, clicked against the coffee table as she adjusted her position. She'd changed from dinner into what she called her casual designer look, though the Chanel blazer probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Before we continue, Natalie announced, pulling out her iPad with the authority of someone accustomed to running meetings, I've done some research. She'd always been thorough, my older sister. Valedictorian in high school, summa cum laude from State University, MBA from Northwestern. Everything I should have been, according to family mythology. The iPad screen reflected the lamplight as she scrolled through what appeared to be a detailed presentation. I've been tracking unemployment statistics for women in your age bracket, Vanessa. The numbers aren't encouraging. Derek leaned forward from his spot on the couch, still wearing his church clothes, the navy suit that made him look like a younger version of Dad. Nat's put together a whole analysis. Show her the charts. Charts, I repeated, accepting the coffee cup Mom offered me. It was my grandmother's china, delicate blue roses on cream porcelain. Each piece worth more than my family realized, but they'd always seen them as nice dishes, not antiques. Statistical analysis, Natalie corrected, turning the iPad toward me. Look at this. Women over 30 who've been unemployed for more than 3 months face a 67% decrease in callback rates. And that's for positions they're overqualified for. The presentation was professional grade, complete with graphs and citations. She'd spent actual time on this, probably hours. The thought that my unemployment had become her weekend project was somehow more humiliating than the dinner conversation. See this red section? She pointed to a particularly damning portion of a pie chart. That represents women who never recover their previous salary level. They settle for positions that pay 20 to 30% less than their last job. Permanently. Amanda nodded from her perch on the ottoman, her own designer handbag, a birthday gift from Derek's commission bonuses, positioned carefully beside her feet. It's not personal, Vanessa. It's just market reality. Employers see gaps in employment as red flags. Especially, Derek added, consulting his own phone where he'd apparently bookmarked several articles, when those gaps coincide with what economists call career transition periods. That's code for midlife crisis in professional terms. Midlife crisis. At 32. I sipped my coffee and let them continue their presentation. Mom returned from the kitchen carrying a manila folder, thick with printed pages. I've been collecting job listings, she announced, settling into her spot on the love seat. Realistic options. Things that might be appropriate for your current situation. The folder landed on the coffee table with a thud that seemed to echo through the room. It was organized with colored tabs, Mom's signature approach to any problem. Yellow for entry level, blue for administrative, green for temporary positions. I found several openings at Riverside Community College, Mom said, flipping to the yellow section. Nothing glamorous, but they offer benefits after 90 days. Reception work, mainly. Some light bookkeeping. Riverside Community College, where I'd taken remedial math as a teenager. The irony was thick enough to cut. And here, she continued, moving to the blue section, are some opportunities in local government. The county is always hiring clerks. It's steady work, Vanessa. Stable. The kind of job where you can work your way up over time. Clerk. The word hung in the air like incense from their church of diminished expectations. Dad cleared his throat, adjusting his reading glasses, the expensive progressive lenses he'd bought after his eye exam. Your mother and I have also discussed a more comprehensive solution to your situation. Comprehensive, I repeated, noting how they'd turned my unemployment into a puzzle requiring their collective wisdom to solve. We're prepared to help, Dad continued, his tone taking on the gravity he'd used when explaining why I couldn't have a car at 16 or why they wouldn't co-sign my college loans. Financially. But with conditions. Natalie leaned forward, her role as family CFO clearly established. We've calculated your basic living expenses. Rent, utilities, groceries, gas. Nothing extravagant. We can cover those costs for 6 months while you find suitable employment. Suitable employment, Derek clarified, meaning whatever's available. No more holding out for management positions or consulting work or whatever it was you were doing before. The last job had been senior strategic analyst at Morrison Technologies, no relation to our family name, just unfortunate coincidence. I'd lasted 8 months before the company downsized, eliminating my entire department. The severance had been generous, though not generous enough to make my family stop treating my unemployment like a character flaw. 6 months, Mom emphasized, should be more than enough time to find something. Anything. The goal is getting back into the workforce, rebuilding your resume, showing employers you're willing to start from the bottom. Start from the bottom. At 32, with an MBA from Columbia and 6 years of corporate experience, I was expected to start from the bottom. Of course, Natalie added, consulting her iPad again, accepting our assistance would mean accepting our oversight. Weekly check-ins, job search progress reports, approval of any major expenditures. Think of it as accountability, Derek said, warming to the theme. Like having a personal board of directors. We all want you to succeed, Ness, but success requires structure. Discipline. External motivation when internal motivation isn't enough. Amanda nodded enthusiastically. Derek's sales team uses similar accountability systems. Weekly metrics, progress tracking, performance reviews. It's amazing how much people can accomplish when they know someone's watching. I looked around the room at my family, my loving, successful, utterly clueless family, and felt that crack in my chest widen slightly. They'd organized my rescue like a corporate restructuring, complete with spreadsheets and performance indicators. "This is very thorough," I said finally, setting down my coffee cup with careful precision. "You've all put a lot of thought into my situation." "We have," Dad confirmed, his voice heavy with paternal concern. "Because we love you, sweetheart. And sometimes love means making tough decisions for people who can't make them for themselves." The trust fund statement was still folded in my purse, less than 10 feet away from their intervention materials. $89,247,652.33. But they didn't need to know that. Not yet. "I appreciate everything you've done here," I said, standing up and smoothing my thrift store blazer. "Really? It means a lot to know my family cares this much about my future." "So you'll consider our proposal?" Mom asked hopefully. "I'll definitely consider it," I replied, gathering my purse and keys. "I just need some time to process all this information. It's a lot to take in." "Of course," Natalie said, already closing her iPad with the satisfaction of someone who just delivered a flawless presentation. "Take the night to think it over. But don't take too long, Vanessa. The job market doesn't wait for anyone." I drove home in my 12-year-old Honda, past Derek's BMW and Natalie's Mercedes, listening to their voices fade behind me. They thought they'd cornered the market on family success. They thought they understood struggle and triumph and the price of achievement. Tomorrow, I'd begin showing them exactly how much they didn't know about any of those things. The accountability program began exactly 48 hours later, just as Natalie had promised. Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. sharp, my phone rang with the efficiency of a corporate alarm system. "Good morning, Vanessa. This is your wake-up call." Natalie's voice carried the crisp authority of someone who'd been awake since 5:30 a.m., probably already through her yoga routine and first espresso. "I'm outside your building. We're starting today." I peered through my apartment window down to the parking lot, where her Mercedes gleamed like a silver beacon among the more modest vehicles of my fellow renters. She sat behind the wheel in what appeared to be a tailored business suit, phone pressed to her ear, looking like she was about to conduct a hostile takeover of my Tuesday. "Starting what exactly?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer would involve clipboards and color-coded schedules. "Your rehabilitation program. I've cleared my morning to help you develop proper job search protocols. We're going to turn this unemployment situation around using proven methodologies." 15 minutes later, Natalie stood in my living room holding a leather portfolio that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She dressed for the occasion in what I recognized as her client presentation outfit: charcoal gray Armani suit, pearl earrings, hair pulled back in a severe bun that meant business. "First things first," she announced, setting her portfolio on my coffee table with ceremonial precision, "we need to assess your current job search infrastructure." My apartment suddenly felt smaller under her scrutiny. The mismatched furniture I'd accumulated over the years, some inherited, some purchased secondhand, some borrowed from friends, looked shabby compared to her polished presence. She surveyed my living space like a general examining battleground terrain. "Where do you conduct your job search activities?" she asked, pulling out a legal pad that already contained several pages of handwritten notes. "My laptop," I gestured toward the aging MacBook on my kitchen table, surrounded by coffee rings and scattered papers. "Sometimes the couch if I want to be more comfortable." Natalie frowned, making notes with a gold pen that caught the morning light. "Workspace optimization is crucial for productivity. You can't approach career reconstruction from a couch. It sends the wrong psychological signals to your subconscious." She moved through my apartment like an efficiency consultant, cataloging deficiencies with professional thoroughness. The kitchen table became inadequate workspace lacking proper ergonomic support. My filing system, a cardboard box containing printed resumes and company research, earned classification as chaotic document management unsuitable for serious job search endeavors. "Let's review your current methodology," Natalie continued, settling into my single decent chair and opening her portfolio to reveal printed spreadsheets, timeline charts, and what appeared to be a multi-page assessment form. "How many applications have you submitted in the past week?" 7, I replied, perching on the edge of my couch. 7. She wrote the number with the disappointed precision of a teacher grading a failing exam. Industry best practices recommend minimum 15 applications per week for someone in your situation. Preferably 25. Quality over quantity, I suggested. Quantity leads to quality. It's a numbers game, Vanessa. Every rejection brings you statistically closer to acceptance. You can't optimize for perfect opportunities when you need immediate employment. She flipped to a new page, revealing a printed list of local businesses, each entry annotated with her handwriting. I've researched every company within 30 miles that might potentially hire someone with your background. Cross-referenced with current openings, company culture assessments, and realistic salary expectations based on your employment gap. The list was extensive, dozens of companies I'd never heard of, most offering positions that seemed designed for recent college graduates or career changers. Administrative assistants, junior analysts, customer service representatives. Entry-level positions with entry-level salaries. Brookstone Insurance needs a claims processor, Natalie read aloud, checking items off her list. Starting salary $28,000, but they provide comprehensive training. Valley Medical Center has openings for medical records clerks, $32,000 to start, excellent benefits package. Medical records clerk. The same job Mom had suggested during Sunday dinner, now presented with Natalie's professional research backing. Here's what we're going to do, she continued, pulling out a scheduling calendar that looked like it belonged in a corporate boardroom. Daily application quotas, weekly progress reviews, bi-weekly strategy adjustments based on response rates and interview conversion statistics. She'd created an entire system around my unemployment, complete with metrics and performance indicators. Color-coded entries marked different types of applications: blue for administrative positions, green for entry-level corporate roles, yellow for temporary assignments that might lead to permanent placement. Monday through Friday, minimum 3 applications per day. Weekends reserved for interview preparation, wardrobe planning, and strategic networking activities. She handed me a printed schedule that looked more demanding than most full-time jobs. Strategic networking, I repeated, scanning the packed calendar. Professional association meetings, industry mixers, informational interviews with family connections. Derek knows several people in human resources who've agreed to provide guidance. Dad's golf buddies include 2 small business owners who might have openings. The thought of networking through Dad's golf contacts made my stomach clench. Presenting myself as the Morrison family charity case, seeking employment favors from men who knew me as Bill's daughter who never quite found her way. We're also implementing appearance optimization protocols, Natalie continued, consulting another section of her portfolio. Professional wardrobe assessment, interview presentation coaching, personal branding strategy development. She gestured toward my current outfit, jeans and a sweater I'd owned since graduate school. No judgment, but your current presentation doesn't communicate employability in competitive markets. We need to project confidence, competence, and hunger for opportunity. Hunger for opportunity. The phrase made me think of the trust fund statement still folded in my purse, just feet away from Natalie's intervention materials. I've scheduled you for Thursday afternoon at Nordstrom Personal Shopping Services, she announced, making notes in her calendar. Nordstrom Rack, she corrected, given budget constraints. We'll focus on building foundational professional pieces that can mix and match across multiple interview scenarios. Natalie, this is very thorough, but cost-benefit analysis supports investment in professional appearance, she interrupted, flipping to a page covered with financial calculations. Quality interview clothing pays for itself through improved first impression metrics. Studies show appropriately dressed candidates receive job offers at rates 37% higher than underdressed applicants. She'd researched everything, cited studies, created systems. My sister had transformed my unemployment into a consulting project worthy of her MBA training. The key is accountability and consistency, Natalie explained, gathering her materials with the satisfaction of someone who just solved a complex puzzle. Every successful job search follows predictable patterns. Daily discipline, strategic targeting, professional presentation, persistent follow-up. Her phone buzzed with an incoming call, probably a client requiring her actual professional attention. I need to take this, but I'm leaving you with assignment materials for today. 3 applications minimum, using the companies I've pre-researched. We'll review progress tomorrow morning, same time. She handed me a folder containing printed job listings, application templates, and a tracking spreadsheet where I was supposed to log every submission, response, and follow-up action. Remember, Natalie said, pausing at my door with her phone still buzzing, success requires systems. Emotion and inspiration are unreliable. Structure and accountability produce results. After she left, I sat in my suddenly quiet apartment surrounded by her optimization materials. Application quotas, appearance protocols, networking schedules. She'd weaponized my unemployment with corporate efficiency, turning job searching into a performance metric. My purse sat on the kitchen counter, still containing the trust fund statement that would make her entire intervention program irrelevant. $89 million that rendered her job listings and wardrobe consultations and networking strategies completely unnecessary. But watching Natalie transform my situation into spreadsheets and action items had been illuminating. This was how my family saw me, as a problem requiring their superior knowledge to solve, a project demanding their successful intervention. They'd never considered that I might not need their rescue. That their expertise might be irrelevant. That their assumptions about my situation might be completely wrong. Tomorrow morning, Natalie would call for her progress report, expecting compliance with her systematic approach to my employment crisis. She was going to be very surprised by what I had to report. Wednesday morning brought Natalie's follow-up call at exactly 8 a.m., her voice carrying the expectant tone of a project manager reviewing deliverables. Progress report time, she announced without preamble. How many applications did you submit yesterday? I'm hoping you exceeded the minimum quota we discussed. I glanced at the folder she'd left behind, still sitting unopened on my coffee table beside my laptop. Actually, I had some questions about your research methodology. Questions? The slight pause in her voice suggested this wasn't the response she'd anticipated. What kind of questions? Well, take Brookstone Insurance, for example. The claims processor position you highlighted. I did some additional research on the company, and there are some interesting details you might have missed. I could hear papers rustling on her end, probably flipping through her meticulously organized portfolio. I was very thorough in my analysis, Vanessa. What details? Their current claims processing department has a 93% annual turnover rate. The position you flagged has been posted continuously for 8 months, which suggests either impossible job requirements or significant workplace issues. Also, their parent company is currently under investigation by the State Insurance Commission for claim processing irregularities. The silence stretched longer this time. Where did you find that information? Securities and Exchange Commission filings, state regulatory databases, employee review sites like Glassdoor. The kind of due diligence you do before recommending any investment opportunity. I kept my voice casual, conversational. I assume you apply the same research standards to job opportunities that you use for your marketing clients? Of course I do thorough research, Natalie replied, though her tone had shifted slightly. But some of those regulatory details might not be directly relevant to entry-level positions. Actually, they're very relevant. Companies with high turnover and regulatory problems typically have unstable management structures, limited advancement opportunities, and higher probability of sudden layoffs. Taking a position there would likely mean returning to unemployment within 12 months, except now with a failed job stint on my resume. I moved to my laptop, pulling up the detailed company analysis I'd compiled the previous evening. Not because I needed a job at Brookstone Insurance, but because I was curious about the quality of Natalie's research. Let me check Valley Medical Center as well, I continued, scrolling through my notes. The medical records clerk position. Starting salary $32,000, which sounds reasonable until you factor in their mandatory overtime policies, weekend shift requirements, and the fact that they're transitioning to automated record systems. The position you're recommending will likely be eliminated through digitization within 18 months. Vanessa, I spent considerable time researching these opportunities. I'm sure you did. But there's a difference between researching job listings and researching companies. For instance, Did you know that Valley Medical is currently facing a class action lawsuit from former employees regarding unpaid overtime? Or that their employee satisfaction ratings rank in the bottom 15% for healthcare organizations in this region? The information had taken me less than 2 hours to compile, using professional databases and research techniques I developed during my corporate consulting years. Skills that apparently weren't common knowledge in my family. Where are you getting all this information? Natalie asked, her voice taking on an edge I recognized from childhood arguments. Public records, professional databases, industry reports. The same sources any competent analyst would use before making recommendations. I paused, letting that sink in. I'm surprised you didn't include this level of detail in your research, given your professional background. I was focusing on immediate employment opportunities, not conducting full corporate investigations. But wouldn't you advise your marketing clients to research potential partners thoroughly before entering any business relationship? Employment is just another form of business relationship. Due diligence protects both parties. I could hear her breathing change, the way it always did when Natalie encountered unexpected resistance to her carefully constructed plans. She'd built her entire intervention around the assumption that I lacked the skills or knowledge to conduct proper job searching. Let's talk about your networking recommendations, I continued, pulling up another section of my analysis. You mentioned Derek's HR contacts and Dad's golf buddies. I did some background research there as well. Background research on family friends? Professional research. LinkedIn profiles, company information, industry standings. Did you know that Derek's friend at Morrison Industries, the HR manager he wanted to introduce me to, was laid off 6 weeks ago? The entire HR department was outsourced to a third-party firm based in Atlanta. I wasn't aware of that development. And Dad's golf buddy who owns the accounting firm? His company has been operating at a loss for 3 consecutive quarters. They're currently downsizing, not hiring. I found the financial information in their business license renewal filings. The silence on Natalie's end stretched long enough that I wondered if she'd hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a different quality, less corporate authority, more genuine curiosity. How do you know how to access all these databases and reports? It's what I did in my last job, Natalie. Strategic analysis, due diligence research, market intelligence gathering. Before Morrison Technologies downsized my department, I spent 3 years researching companies, analyzing market conditions, and providing detailed recommendations to executives making million-dollar decisions. I thought you were your job title was analyst, but I assumed. You assumed I was doing basic data entry or administrative work. I finished the sentence she couldn't. Everyone did. When I mentioned strategic consulting, the family heard office job. When I talked about corporate intelligence gathering, you heard paperwork. I walked to my kitchen window, looking down at the parking lot where her Mercedes sat gleaming in the morning sun. The position I lost paid $97,000 annually, plus performance bonuses that typically added another 20 to 30%. The severance package was 6 months' full salary, which doesn't expire for another 8 weeks. $97,000? Her voice was barely a whisper. Plus bonuses. Last year my total compensation was $123,000. Which is why I haven't been desperately applying for $28,000 claims processing positions. I've been selective about opportunities that match my qualifications and experience level. The revelation hung between us like a bridge neither of us had expected to cross. I could practically hear her recalculating everything she thought she knew about my situation. Why didn't you tell us? Why let us think you were struggling financially? Because no one asked about the details. Everyone assumed unemployment meant desperation. Sunday dinner was the first time anyone inquired about my job search, and even then, the conversation focused on my failures rather than my qualifications. But the way you dress, your apartment, your car. I don't believe in spending money to impress people who should care about me regardless of my possessions. The apartment meets my needs. The car is reliable. The clothes are comfortable. I paused, watching a maintenance worker trim hedges in the courtyard below. I wasn't aware my family's love was contingent on displaying wealth. We don't. Natalie struggled with words in a way I'd rarely heard from my articulate sister. The companies you researched yesterday? I'd already investigated most of them weeks ago. The networking contacts you arranged? I'd already identified better opportunities through my professional associations. The application quotas you established? I've been averaging 12 applications per week, but targeting director-level positions that require extensive qualification screening. Director-level positions? Senior Strategic Analyst, Corporate Development Manager, Market Intelligence Director. Positions that typically take 3 to 6 months to fill because companies interview extensively before hiring at that level. The kind of jobs that don't get posted on general employment websites. I could hear papers shuffling again on her end, but this time it sounded less organized, more frantic. I had no idea you were operating at that level. Because you never asked what level I was operating at. You saw unemployment and assumed incompetence. You saw my lifestyle choices and assumed financial desperation. I kept my voice gentle, not wanting to sound accusatory. You created solutions for problems that didn't exist. The accountability program, the wardrobe consultation, the daily quotas. Designed for someone starting their career or returning to work after extended absence. Not for someone with 6 years of corporate experience taking time to find the right strategic opportunity. The trust fund statement was still in my purse, still unmentioned. But this conversation had already shifted the foundation of everything my family thought they knew about my situation. Vanessa, everyone just wanted to help. I know. And I appreciate the intention. But help works best when it's based on understanding the actual situation rather than assumptions about what the situation might be. Tomorrow, I had my first final round interview for a corporate development director position at Hartwell Industries. The salary range started at $135,000, not including equity participation. But I wasn't ready to share that information yet. First, I wanted to see how my family processed this initial revelation about their assumptions. The conversation was just beginning. The family emergency meeting was called for Thursday evening, though no one used those exact words. Mom's text arrived at 2 p.m., family dinner tonight. Important discussion. 6:30 sharp. Don't bring anything. The phrasing felt ominous, like being summoned to a corporate tribunal. I knew Natalie had shared our conversation with the rest of the family, probably framing it as a significant development requiring group consultation. The Morrisons didn't handle surprises well, especially surprises that disrupted their carefully constructed narratives. I arrived at exactly 6:30 to find the entire family already assembled in the living room, their faces wearing the serious expressions typically reserved for funerals or financial emergencies. Dad sat in his recliner with a manila folder balanced on his lap. Mom occupied her usual spot on the love seat, hands folded in her lap like she was preparing for prayer. Derek and Amanda flanked the couch, leaving me the single chair that felt increasingly like a defendant's dock. Natalie stood near the fireplace in full presentation mode, her iPad in hand and her expression carrying the weight of someone about to deliver unwelcome news to shareholders. "We need to talk," Dad announced, his voice carrying the gravity he'd used when explaining why my college fund had been redirected toward Derek's business school expenses. "Natalie shared some concerning information about your employment situation." "Concerning how?" I asked, settling into the designated chair and noting how the room's configuration created an us versus me dynamic. "You let us believe you were struggling," Mom said, her voice tight with what sounded like accusation. "You sat through Sunday dinner accepting our sympathy, our offers of help, our financial assistance, without mentioning that you were deliberately choosing to remain unemployed." "I never said I was struggling financially." "You didn't correct our assumptions," Derek interjected, consulting his own notes written on what appeared to be legal pad pages. "You allowed us to plan intervention strategies based on incomplete information." Amanda nodded emphatically. "It's deceptive by omission. In business, that kind of misrepresentation could be considered fraud." The accusation hung in the air like incense from their church of outraged righteousness. They transformed my unemployment from a family crisis requiring their rescue into a betrayal deserving their judgment. Let me understand this correctly, I said, looking around the room at their disappointed faces. You're upset because I didn't volunteer detailed financial information that you didn't ask for? We asked about your job search, Natalie said, flipping through screens on her iPad. Multiple times. You were evasive about specifics. I mentioned I was being selective about opportunities. You interpreted that as unrealistic expectations rather than strategic career planning. Dad opened his manila folder, revealing printed pages that looked like financial calculations. Natalie showed us the salary information you finally disclosed. $97,000, plus bonuses. If that's true, why are you living like a college student? The question revealed everything about their values that I'd been trying to ignore for years. Success wasn't about achieving professional goals or personal satisfaction, it was about displaying wealth in ways they could recognize and validate. Because I don't define my worth through material possessions, I replied. My apartment meets my needs. My car is reliable. My lifestyle is comfortable and sustainable. But it's not proportional to your income level, Derek argued, warming to the theme. People in your salary bracket typically drive luxury vehicles, live in upscale neighborhoods, wear designer clothing. Your lifestyle choices suggest either financial irresponsibility or deliberate deception about your actual earnings. Or, I suggested, different priorities than material status symbols. Mom leaned forward, her expression shifting from disappointment to what looked like genuine confusion. Sweetheart, we just don't understand why you choose to live beneath your means when you could afford so much more. Living beneath my means allows me to save money, invest in my future, and maintain financial independence. It means I can be selective about job opportunities instead of accepting the first offer out of desperation. But what about appearances? Amanda asked, gesturing toward my jeans and sweater ensemble. Professional networking requires projecting success. People judge your credibility based on how you present yourself. People who judge my professional credibility based on my handbag probably aren't people I want to work with. The room fell silent except for the grandfather clock marking time with its steady tick. I could see them processing this information, trying to reconcile their image of unemployment desperation with evidence of deliberate financial planning. There's something else, Natalie said, consulting her iPad again. I did some additional research after our conversation yesterday. Corporate strategic analysts with your experience level, the employment market is actually quite competitive for qualified candidates. She discovered what I'd been trying to tell them all along, though apparently my word alone hadn't been sufficient evidence. Companies hiring at that level conduct extensive background checks, multiple interview rounds, comprehensive reference reviews. The process typically takes 90 to 120 days from initial application to job offer. 120 days, Dad repeated, his calculator mind already working the implications. Which means, Derek said slowly, you've actually been following industry standard timeline for executive-level job searching. And your selectivity about opportunities, Mom added, that's not unrealistic expectations. That's appropriate professional behavior for someone at your level. I watched my family's narrative about my situation crumble in real time, their assumptions dissolving under the weight of actual information. The intervention they'd planned, the rescue they'd organized, the financial assistance they'd offered, all based on incomplete understanding of circumstances they'd never bothered to investigate. But why didn't you explain this from the beginning? Natalie asked, her voice carrying frustration rather than accusation. Why let us spend weeks worrying about your financial stability? Because you never asked about my financial stability. You asked why I was still unemployed, assumed I was desperate, and immediately began planning solutions for problems I didn't have. We were trying to help, Mom said quietly. I know. But your help was based on what you thought I needed rather than what I actually needed. There's a difference between offering support and imposing rescue. Dad closed his manila folder, setting it aside with the careful precision of someone abandoning a carefully constructed argument. What do you actually need from us, Vanessa? The question caught me off guard. In 32 years, I couldn't remember any family member asking what I needed rather than telling me what they thought I needed. Honestly? I need you to trust that I'm capable of managing my own career and financial decisions. I need you to stop assuming that different choices means wrong choices. And I need you to ask questions before offering solutions. We just want to see you successful, Amanda said, though her definition of success was clearly different from mine. I am successful. I built a six-figure career in a competitive field. I maintained financial stability through a job transition. I'm conducting a strategic job search that's proceeding according to industry timelines. Success doesn't always look like what you expect it to look like. The trust fund statement was still in my purse, still unmentioned. But this conversation had already shifted something fundamental in our family dynamic. For the first time, they were seeing me as someone with expertise rather than someone requiring their expertise. I have a final interview tomorrow, I said, watching their faces carefully. Corporate Development Director position. If it goes well, I should have an offer within 2 weeks. Corporate Development Director, Natalie repeated, her business mind clearly calculating the implications of that title. Starting salary range is $135,000 to $150,000, plus equity participation and performance bonuses. The silence that followed was different from their earlier disappointment. This was processing silence, the kind that comes when people realize they've been operating from fundamentally incorrect assumptions. Tomorrow's interview would determine whether I needed to share the full truth about my financial situation. But tonight had already revealed something more important than money. My family was capable of changing their perspective when presented with actual facts. The real revelation was still coming. Friday morning's interview at Hartwell Industries went better than I'd anticipated. The position was Corporate Development Director, reporting directly to the CEO, with responsibility for merger and acquisition analysis, strategic partnership evaluation, and market expansion planning. Exactly the kind of role I'd been targeting, senior enough to utilize my expertise, challenging enough to provide growth opportunities, and compensated appropriately for the level of responsibility. Patricia Hartwell, the CEO, was a woman in her early 50s who'd built the company from a regional consulting firm into a national player in corporate strategy services. She conducted interviews with the focused intensity of someone who understood that hiring decisions at this level could determine a company's trajectory for years. Your background is impressive, she said, reviewing my portfolio across the polished conference table. Morrison Technologies spoke very highly of your work during their downsizing transition. They mentioned you identified cost savings that exceeded their initial projections by 40%. Market analysis revealed redundancies in their vendor relationships that hadn't been previously recognized, I explained. Consolidating suppliers and renegotiating contracts based on actual usage data rather than historical patterns. Which demonstrates exactly the kind of strategic thinking we need here. Patricia leaned forward, her expression indicating the conversation was moving beyond basic qualification review. We're considering expansion into the Southeast markets. The initial analysis suggests significant opportunity, but we need someone who can dig deeper, identify potential risks and competitive advantages. The discussion continued for 90 minutes, covering market analysis methodologies, due diligence procedures, and strategic planning frameworks. Patricia asked detailed questions about my experience with corporate acquisitions, regulatory compliance research, and stakeholder management. The conversation felt less like an interview and more like a consulting session where two professionals discussed complex business challenges. I'll be honest, Patricia said as we concluded, you're overqualified for most positions in this market. Your experience level typically commands director-level roles at Fortune 500 companies. Why are you interested in working with a mid-sized firm like Hartwell? Opportunity for immediate impact, I replied. Large corporations have established processes that limit individual influence. Here, I can help shape strategy rather than just implement decisions made by others. And the compensation expectations? I want to ensure we're aligned before moving forward. The salary range you mentioned is appropriate for the position. I'm more interested in equity participation and performance-based bonuses that reflect actual contribution to company growth. Patricia smiled, the kind of smile that suggests someone has just confirmed exactly what you hope to hear. I'll have an offer letter prepared by Monday morning. Pending reference checks, which I expect will be formalities given Morrison Technologies' recommendation. The drive home from Hartwell Industries felt different than previous post-interview experiences. This wasn't hope mixed with uncertainty, this was professional recognition from someone who understood the value of strategic expertise. Patricia Hartwell had evaluated my qualifications based on demonstrated results rather than assumptions about my circumstances. I stopped at a coffee shop near my apartment, one of those independent places with mismatched furniture and locally roasted beans that cost twice what corporate chains charged. The barista was a graduate student I'd chatted with occasionally, someone who understood the luxury of choosing quality over convenience when financial pressure wasn't a determining factor. "Celebrating something?" she asked, noting my unusually cheerful demeanor. "Job interview that went well." "Very well." "The corporate position you mentioned?" "That's fantastic. You seemed confident it was a good fit." The casual conversation reminded me how different my actual life was from my family's perception of my situation. Here was someone who'd observed my routine for months, ordering expensive coffee, reading business journals, conducting phone interviews with obvious professionalism, and had never questioned my financial stability or career prospects. My phone buzzed with a text from Natalie. "How did the interview go? Call when you're available to discuss." The message felt different from her previous communications. Less intervention, more genuine interest. Thursday evening's family meeting had shifted something in our dynamic, though I suspected the complete revelation was still ahead of us. I drove to my apartment thinking about Patricia Hartwell's comment regarding overqualification. She was right, of course. My experience level did typically command positions at larger corporations with higher salaries and more extensive benefits. But those positions also came with political complications, corporate bureaucracy, and limited autonomy that I'd grown tired of navigating. The truth was, I didn't need to maximize my earning potential through employment. The trust fund provided financial security that allowed me to prioritize professional satisfaction over salary optimization. I could choose positions based on intellectual challenge, growth opportunity, and workplace culture rather than compensation packages. My family didn't understand this luxury because they didn't know it existed in my life. To them, career decisions were primarily financial decisions. Job security meant salary security. Professional advancement meant wage advancement. They couldn't conceive of making employment choices based on criteria other than monetary compensation. The trust fund statement was still in my purse, though its significance had evolved over the past week. Initially, it had been my secret weapon against their assumptions about my desperation. Now it felt more like the final piece of a puzzle they didn't realize they were trying to solve. I called Natalie from my apartment, settling into the couch with a cup of the expensive coffee I'd brought home. "How did it go?" she asked immediately, her voice carrying genuine curiosity rather than rescue mission urgency. "Very well. They're preparing an offer letter for Monday." "That's wonderful. What's the position again?" "Corporate Development Director. Strategic Planning, Market Analysis, Acquisition Evaluation. Reporting directly to the CEO." "Director level," Natalie repeated, and I could hear her processing the implications. That's a significant position." "Senior management track." "It is." "And the compensation package?" "Competitive for the role and market. More importantly, it's work I'll find intellectually engaging with opportunities for meaningful impact." The conversation continued for 20 minutes, covering details about the company, the position requirements, and my assessment of growth potential. Natalie asked intelligent questions about market positioning, competitive advantages, and long-term strategic opportunities. She was engaging with my career as she would discuss any professional business opportunity. "I owe you an apology," she said finally. "We all do. We made assumptions about your situation without understanding the actual circumstances. You were trying to help based on the information you had. But we should have asked for more information before assuming we understood the situation. In business, I would never make recommendations without conducting thorough analysis. I should have applied the same standards to family situations." The acknowledgement felt significant, like watching someone recalibrate their fundamental assumptions about reality. "There's something else I should probably mention," I said, reaching for my purse where the trust fund statement waited. "About my overall financial situation." "What about it?" I unfolded the document, looking at the numbers that had the power to completely reframe everything my family thought they knew about my life, my choices, and my circumstances. It's more complex than I've mentioned. Complex how? The moment felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that the next words would change everything irrevocably. My family had spent the week discovering that their assumptions about my career were wrong. Now they were about to learn that their assumptions about my financial situation were even more fundamentally incorrect. I think it would be better to discuss this in person. Are you free this weekend? Of course. Should I be concerned? Not concerned. Just prepared for more surprises. The revelation was about to shift from career assumptions to something far more significant. And I was finally ready to share the complete truth about my situation. Saturday afternoon found me sitting in my car outside my parents' house, the trust fund statement folded in my jacket pocket like a loaded weapon. The family had assembled for what Mom called a celebration lunch, in honor of my job interview success, though I suspected they were equally motivated by curiosity about the complex financial situation I'd mentioned to Natalie. The house looked the same as always, manicured lawn that Dad maintained with religious devotion, flower beds Mom updated seasonally, the two-car garage that showcased Derek's BMW and Natalie's Mercedes like trophies of their success. My Honda looked modest in the driveway, which had always been the point. I found them gathered in the kitchen, where Mom had prepared her special occasion meal, herb-crusted salmon, roasted vegetables, and the good wine that only appeared for achievements worth celebrating. The atmosphere felt different from our previous family meetings, less intervention tribunal, more genuine anticipation. There she is, Dad announced as I entered, his voice carrying pride that hadn't been present during the unemployment crisis. Our new corporate development director. Pending the offer letter, I corrected, accepting Mom's congratulatory hug. Which you'll receive Monday morning, Natalie said confidently. Director-level positions don't conduct final interviews unless they're prepared to extend offers. The lunch conversation flowed naturally, covering details about Hartwell Industries, my assessment of Patricia Hartwell's leadership style, and the strategic challenges facing mid-sized consulting firms in competitive markets. My family engaged with obvious interest, asking informed questions and offering relevant insights from their own professional experiences. It felt like the first time they'd viewed my career as legitimate business rather than concerning personal failure. So about this complex financial situation you mentioned, Derek said as Mom served dessert, her famous chocolate torte that accompanied all major family announcements. Should we be worried about hidden debts or tax problems? Nothing like that, I assured him, reaching into my jacket pocket. Actually, it's the opposite kind of complexity. I placed the folded trust fund statement on the dining table, the official letterhead from Whitmore and Associates Trust Management visible even before anyone could read the contents. What's this? Mom asked, adjusting her reading glasses to examine the document. Financial statement from my trust fund administrator, I said quietly. Something I should have mentioned earlier. Dad picked up the paper, unfolding it with the careful precision he used for important documents. His expression changed as he read, moving from curiosity to confusion to something approaching shock. $89 million, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The silence that followed was absolute. Mom's fork clattered against her dessert plate. Natalie's wine glass stopped halfway to her mouth. Derek leaned forward as if he'd misheard something fundamental. 89 million, Amanda repeated, her voice carrying the disbelief of someone trying to process an incomprehensible number. Million, Mom said, looking from the document to my face as if one of them might provide clarification for this impossible information. Grandmother Elizabeth's inheritance, I explained, watching their faces as they struggled to reconcile this revelation with everything they thought they knew about my life. She was significantly wealthier than anyone realized. Dad continued staring at the trust fund statement as if the numbers might change if he looked long enough. This says the trust was established 6 years ago. Right after her death. She left specific instructions about the inheritance. I wasn't allowed to access the principal until age 30, and I wasn't permitted to discuss the details with family members until I reached financial maturity and demonstrated responsibility. Financial maturity, Natalie repeated mechanically, her business mind clearly struggling to process this information. The trust administrators required evidence of stable employment, reasonable living expenses, and prudent financial decision-making before allowing access to the full inheritance. Derek was reading over Dad's shoulder, his finger tracing the numbers as if he needed physical confirmation of their reality. This is more money than our entire family has earned collectively in our lifetimes. Why didn't you tell us? Mom asked, her voice carrying hurt rather than anger. 6 years, Vanessa. 6 years you've let us worry about your finances, your future, your security. Because the trust term specifically prohibited disclosure until certain conditions were met. And because I wanted to establish my own identity and capabilities before anyone knew about the inheritance. I looked around the table at their stunned faces, seeing my family recalibrate everything they'd believed about my circumstances, my choices, my seemingly modest lifestyle. The apartment, the car, the clothes, Amanda said slowly, you could afford anything you wanted. I can afford anything I want. What I want is a simple life focused on meaningful work rather than material accumulation. But why continue working at all? Derek asked, his practical mind jumping to the obvious question. With this kind of money, you could retire immediately. Travel, invest, live off the interest alone. Because work provides purpose, intellectual challenge, and professional satisfaction that money can't replace. The trust fund means I can choose jobs based on interest and growth potential rather than salary requirements. Dad was still studying the document, his calculator mind working through implications. The interest alone on this amount would generate more annual income than most people's full-time salaries. Approximately 3 to 4 million per year, depending on investment performance, I confirmed. Which is why I could afford to be selective about job opportunities instead of accepting the first available position. The revelation was reshaping everything in real time. I could see them revisiting every conversation, every assumption, every intervention they'd planned based on completely incorrect understanding of my financial reality. The unemployment benefits, Natalie said suddenly. You never applied for unemployment benefits. Because I didn't need them. The financial assistance we offered, the accountability program, the networking contacts, Derek continued, none of that was necessary. None of it was necessary, but I appreciated the intention behind your offers. Mom was shaking her head slowly, as if trying to clear confusion from her thoughts. I don't understand why you let us treat you like a charity case. Why endure our lectures about financial responsibility and career planning when you had more resources than all of us combined? Because your lectures weren't really about money. They were about your perception of my worth, my capabilities, my success. The trust fund doesn't change my professional qualifications or personal character. But it changes everything else, Amanda protested. Your priorities, your choices, your need for family support. It changes my financial security. It doesn't change my desire for meaningful relationships with people who value me for reasons beyond my bank account. The conversation had reached a turning point where everything they thought they knew about me was being questioned and reconstructed. The trust fund revelation wasn't just about money, it was about the fundamental assumptions they'd made regarding my competence, my judgment, and my need for their guidance. How long have you had access to these funds? Dad asked, his practical nature focusing on timeline details. Full access since my 30th birthday. Limited access for approved expenses since the trust was established. 2 years, Natalie calculated. You've had access to this inheritance for 2 years while we were worrying about your career stability and financial planning. And during those 2 years, I completed my MBA, built a successful consulting career, maintained financial independence, and made strategic life choices based on personal values rather than economic pressure. The weight of their revised understanding was visible in their expressions. This wasn't just a revelation about hidden wealth, it was a complete reframing of my competence, my decision-making capabilities, and my need for their interventions. The family meeting they'd planned to celebrate my job interview success had become something entirely different. Now they were confronting the reality that their rescue missions, their guidance programs, and their improvement strategies had been based on fundamentally incorrect assumptions about my situation. The real reckoning was just beginning. The silence stretched for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Dad carefully refolded the trust fund statement, his movements deliberate and precise, as if handling evidence that might disappear if treated carelessly. Mom remained frozen with her dessert fork halfway to her mouth, her expression cycling through emotions I couldn't entirely identify. Derek was the first to break the silence, his voice carrying the hollow quality of someone whose entire worldview had just been demolished. I offered you minimum wage filing work. At my company. Where I make $68,000 a year. You were trying to help, I said gently. I was trying to help someone I thought was desperate, he corrected, running his hands through his hair in the same gesture he'd used since childhood when overwhelmed. I was offering charity to someone who could buy my entire company without affecting her checking account balance. Amanda leaned back in her chair, her expression moving from shock towards something that looked like embarrassment. The networking contacts, the resume advice, the professional development suggestions. All came from a place of caring, I finished. I understood the motivation. No, you don't understand, Amanda continued, her voice gaining intensity. I gave career advice to someone with more financial resources than I'll ever see in my lifetime. I explained professional advancement strategies to someone who doesn't need professional advancement because she's already financially independent for life. Natalie had been unusually quiet, her business mind clearly working through calculations and implications. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the clinical tone she used for complex client analyses. The intervention program I designed, the job search optimization, the accountability systems, I treated you like an entry-level candidate struggling with basic employment skills. She paused, looking down at her hands. When you questioned my research methodology, when you pointed out the flaws in my company analysis, you weren't just being thorough. You were demonstrating expertise that I should have recognized. Your research was actually quite good, I said. You just hadn't dug deep enough into the regulatory and financial stability issues. Because I was researching jobs for someone I thought needed immediate employment, not someone conducting strategic career planning with the luxury of unlimited time and resources. Natalie's admission carried the weight of professional humiliation. Dad cleared his throat, the way he always did before attempting to restore order to chaotic situations. Help me understand the timeline here, Vanessa. When exactly did you gain access to these funds? Partial access at 25 for education and approved living expenses. Full discretionary access at 30. Complete transparency about the trust terms on my 32nd birthday, which was last month. Last month, Mom repeated, setting down her fork with deliberate precision. So during Sunday dinner, when we were discussing your financial struggles and offering assistance, you had already received complete access to $89 million. Yes. The weight of that confirmation settled over the table like fog. I could see them mentally replaying every conversation, every offer of help, every expression of concern about my financial stability. Why didn't you correct us immediately? Derek asked, his practical nature demanding logical explanations. Why sit through lectures about budgeting and career planning when you could have simply shown us this document? Because the lectures weren't really about budgeting or career planning. They were about your perception that I was failing to meet family standards of success. I looked around the table at their faces, seeing recognition of this truth beginning to dawn. Showing you the trust fund statement would have ended the conversation, but it wouldn't have addressed the underlying assumptions you'd made about my competence and judgment. What underlying assumptions? Mom asked, though her tone suggested she already suspected the answer. That unemployment meant incompetence. That modest living meant financial desperation. That different choices meant wrong choices. That I needed your guidance because I was incapable of managing my own life effectively. The accusations hung in the air without malice, stated as simple observations about family dynamics we'd all participated in but never directly addressed. We were worried about you, Dad said defensively. Unemployment is stressful, financially challenging, emotionally difficult. We wanted to provide support during a difficult transition. And I appreciated that concern. But your support was based on assumptions rather than questions. No one asked about my financial situation, my job search strategy, my timeline expectations, or my actual needs. You diagnosed problems that didn't exist and prescribed solutions for circumstances you hadn't investigated. Amanda was shaking her head slowly, as if trying to process information that contradicted fundamental beliefs. But your lifestyle, your apartment, your car, if you have access to this kind of money, why live like a graduate student? Because I don't define happiness or success through material accumulation. The trust fund provides security and freedom, not an obligation to display wealth. But people judge you based on appearances, Natalie protested, falling back on the professional development principles she'd tried to apply to my situation. In business, in networking, in social situations, presentation matters. People who judge my worth based on my possessions aren't people whose opinions concern me, I replied. And people worth knowing recognize competence and character regardless of designer labels or luxury vehicles. Derek was studying the trust fund statement again, his finger tracing the investment breakdown that showed diversified holdings across multiple asset classes. This isn't just inheritance money sitting in a savings account. This is sophisticated wealth management. Professional investment strategies, tax optimization, long-term growth planning. The trust administrators are some of the best financial managers in the country. Grandmother Elizabeth was very particular about ensuring the inheritance would be properly managed and preserved. Which means you've been receiving professional financial advice from experts while we were offering amateur budgeting tips, Mom said quietly, the full scope of their misguided intervention becoming clear. Expert advice about investment management and tax strategies, I clarified. Not about personal life choices or career decisions. Those remained my responsibility. The revelation was complete now, but its implications were still unfolding around the table. My family was confronting not just the reality of my financial situation, but the reality of their own assumptions, judgments, and well-intentioned but misguided attempts to manage my life. I need to ask, Natalie said, her voice carrying the hesitation of someone afraid to hear the answer, how many of our suggestions and interventions did you actually need? Honestly? None of them. But I appreciated knowing that my family cared enough to want to help, even when the help was based on incomplete information. The truth was laid bare now. Every intervention, every rescue plan, every concerned conversation had been unnecessary. They'd spent weeks worried about problems that didn't exist, offering solutions for circumstances they'd imagined rather than investigated. The reckoning was just beginning. The aftermath of the revelation unfolded over the following weeks like watching a family ecosystem reorganize itself around completely new information. What had started as a simple trust fund disclosure became a fundamental shift in how my family understood our relationships, our assumptions, and our patterns of interaction. Monday morning brought the job offer from Hartwell Industries, exactly as Patricia Hartwell had promised. The compensation package was generous, $142,000 base salary, performance bonuses, equity participation, and comprehensive benefits. Under normal circumstances, it would have represented a significant career advancement and financial improvement. Under my actual circumstances, it represented something more valuable, validation of my professional capabilities and confirmation that my strategic approach to job searching had been correct all along. I accepted the position immediately, not because I needed the income, but because the work aligned with my interests and offered opportunities for meaningful contribution. The trust fund had given me the luxury of choosing employment based on intellectual satisfaction rather than financial necessity. The family's adjustment to this new reality manifested in unexpected ways. Derek called Tuesday evening, his voice carrying an uncertainty I'd never heard before. I've been thinking about our conversation Sunday, he said, the casual confidence that usually characterized his communication noticeably absent. About the job search advice I offered, the networking contacts, the entry-level positions. Derek, you were trying to help based on the information you had. But that's just it, I didn't have information. I had assumptions. And those assumptions were completely wrong. He paused, and I could hear him struggling with concepts that challenged his understanding of our family dynamics. I offered you charity when you could have purchased the company I work for without thinking twice about the expense. Money doesn't change the fact that you cared enough to offer help. Doesn't it, though? Would I have offered the same assistance if I'd known about your financial situation? Or would I have assumed you didn't need family support because you had money? The question revealed the complexity of relationships when financial dynamics shift dramatically. Derek was grappling with whether his concern had been genuine care or condescending pity, whether his offers of help had been motivated by love or superiority. "What kind of help do you actually need from us?" he asked finally. Because everything we offered, financial assistance, career guidance, networking contacts, none of that applies to your real situation. It was the same question Dad had asked during our intervention meeting, but now it carried different weight. Derek was recognizing that their entire approach to family support had been based on assumptions about hierarchy, competence, and need that no longer applied. "I need what I've always needed," I told him. "Family relationships based on who we are rather than what we have. Conversations that start with questions rather than assumptions. Support that asks what someone needs instead of deciding what they should need." Wednesday brought a surprise visit from Mom, who appeared at my apartment door carrying a bottle of wine and wearing an expression I couldn't quite interpret. She'd never visited my apartment before. Our family gatherings always occurred at the parental home where she maintained control over environment and agenda. "I wanted to see how you actually live," she announced, stepping into my modest living space and looking around with obvious curiosity. "Now that I know you choose to live this way rather than being forced to live this way." She moved through my apartment slowly, examining details she'd never bothered to notice before. The carefully selected books on my shelves, the artwork I'd chosen for personal meaning rather than monetary value, the furniture that prioritized comfort and functionality over status display. "It's very intentional," she said finally, settling onto my couch with the wine she'd brought. "Everything here serves a purpose or brings you joy. Nothing is just for show." "Exactly. Your father and I have been talking," she continued, accepting the glass of wine I offered. "About the assumptions we made, the interventions we planned, the worry we invested in situations that didn't require our concern." Mom rarely engaged in conversations about family dynamics or emotional processing. Her preferred approach to relationship issues was practical action rather than psychological analysis. But the trust fund revelation had forced her to confront the difference between caring and controlling, between support and superiority. "We thought we were being good parents," she said quietly. "Providing guidance, offering assistance, sharing wisdom from our experience. But we were actually being condescending to someone who had already demonstrated more financial sophistication and strategic planning than we'd ever achieved. You were being parents who love their daughter and want to see her succeed. But we defined success incorrectly. We measured your achievements against our standards instead of recognizing that you might have different goals, different values, different definitions of what constitutes a successful life." The admission was significant coming from someone who'd spent 32 years confident in her ability to provide appropriate guidance for any situation her children might encounter. "The trust fund changes everything and nothing," I said, refilling our wine glasses. "It changes my financial security and career flexibility. It doesn't change my character, my relationships, or my need for family connection. But it changes how we understand your choices. The modest lifestyle, the selective job searching, the resistance to our suggestions, we interpreted those as signs of poor judgment or unrealistic expectations. Now we realize they were signs of financial independence and personal autonomy." Thursday brought a family dinner invitation that felt different from previous gatherings. The message from Natalie was simple: celebration dinner for your new position. No agenda, no presentations, no intervention strategies. Just family celebrating family success. The dinner itself was a revelation in family dynamics. Without the underlying assumption that I needed their rescue, guidance, or financial assistance, conversations flowed more naturally toward topics of mutual interest. Derek asked about my strategic planning work without offering unsolicited career advice. Amanda inquired about my investment philosophy without suggesting budget optimization techniques. Dad discussed business trends without implying I needed education about professional realities. Most significantly, they asked questions before offering opinions. They requested information before providing solutions. They acknowledged my expertise in areas where I had demonstrated competence rather than assuming I needed their instruction. "I have a confession," Natalie said as we finished dessert. "I've been researching trust fund management and inheritance planning since Sunday. Partly out of curiosity, partly because I realized I knew nothing about the financial structures you've been navigating for years." "And what did you discover?" That trust fund management at your level requires sophisticated understanding of tax law, investment strategy, estate planning, and regulatory compliance. That the decisions you've been making about lifestyle, career, and financial planning demonstrate expertise I hadn't recognized. The acknowledgement represented a complete reversal from her intervention program that had treated me as someone lacking basic life management skills. I also discovered, she continued, that your approach to wealth management is actually quite impressive. Living below your means while building strategic career experience shows long-term thinking that most people with sudden wealth never develop. The family dinner ended with something unprecedented, acknowledgement that I had been making intelligent decisions all along, that my choices reflected values and strategies they hadn't understood, and that their concern had been based on misperceptions rather than actual problems. For the first time in years, I felt seen by my family as a competent adult rather than a project requiring their improvement efforts. The transformation was complete, but the real celebration was just beginning. 3 months later, I hosted my first family gathering in my own space, not because I'd upgraded my living situation, but because my family had finally understood that my modest apartment was a choice rather than a limitation. The occasion was my official promotion to Senior Director of Strategic Development at Hartwell Industries, a role that had evolved naturally from my initial position as the company expanded into new markets. The promotion came with additional responsibilities, a substantial salary increase, and equity options that would have been life-changing for most people. For me, it represented something more valuable, recognition of my professional capabilities and confirmation that choosing work based on intellectual satisfaction rather than financial necessity had been the right approach. My apartment had never looked more welcoming. I'd prepared dinner myself, something I genuinely enjoyed but rarely had time for during intensive job search periods. The table was set with my grandmother's china, the same pieces that had graced family dinners for years but now carried different significance. These weren't just nice dishes, they were heirlooms from the woman whose inheritance had made all my choices possible. Derek arrived first, carrying a bottle of champagne that I recognized as significantly more expensive than his usual selections. His gesture wasn't an attempt to impress, but rather acknowledgement that our family's understanding of gift-giving had evolved along with everything else. "How does it feel to be running strategic development for a company that's expanding into 3 new states?" he asked, settling into my comfortable armchair without the awkward assessment of my lifestyle choices that had characterized his previous visits. "Challenging in the best possible way," I replied, appreciating that his question focused on my professional satisfaction rather than compensation details. "We're analyzing market opportunities in Tennessee, North Carolina, and Georgia." The kind of complex research and strategic planning that made me choose this position over higher-paying offers at larger corporations. "Higher-paying offers," he repeated with a smile that held no trace of his former confusion about my career priorities. "Which you turned down because money wasn't the primary consideration." Money was never the primary consideration. Meaningful work, intellectual challenge, opportunity for impact, those were the factors that mattered. Natalie and Amanda arrived together, both carrying contributions to dinner that showed they'd coordinated their efforts. The casual collaboration represented a shift from their previous approach to family gatherings, where everyone had typically arrived with separate agendas and competing perspectives. "I brought the wine pairing recommendations," Natalie announced, producing a list she'd researched specifically for the meal I'd planned. "And Amanda brought dessert from that bakery you mentioned liking." The attention to my preferences rather than their assumptions about what I should prefer marked another evolution in our family dynamics. They were learning to base interactions on actual knowledge rather than presumptive guidance. Mom and Dad arrived precisely on time, a habit that hadn't changed but now felt less like punctuality enforcement and more like respect for the schedule I'd established. Dad carried flowers, not the generic grocery store bouquet he typically brought to family events, but specifically chosen orchids that he'd remembered me admiring at a botanical garden months earlier. "These should complement your existing plants," he said, noting the carefully tended garden I maintained on my apartment's small balcony. "I asked the florist for something that would thrive in your lighting conditions." The gesture represented attention to details about my actual life rather than assumptions about what my life should include. Dinner conversation flowed with the natural rhythm of people who'd learned to listen before speaking, to ask before assuming, to appreciate rather than correct. Derek shared updates about his own career advancement, prompted by questions that showed genuine interest rather than competitive comparison. Natalie discussed challenges with her marketing agency that sparked productive business strategy conversations where my input was valued rather than dismissed. I have an announcement, Mom said as we finished the main course. Your father and I have been discussing family dynamics, particularly our tendency to offer solutions before understanding problems. Dad nodded, continuing the thought with characteristic precision. We've decided to implement what we're calling question-first communication. Before offering advice, suggestions, or assistance, we're going to ask what kind of support someone actually wants. It's harder than it sounds, Mom admitted. 30 years of parenting creates habits that are difficult to break. But we're learning that caring about someone means respecting their autonomy rather than trying to direct their choices. The acknowledgement felt significant not just for its content but for its timing. They were sharing this realization during a celebration of my professional success, connecting their personal growth to recognition of my competence. There's something else, Amanda said, her voice carrying the hesitation of someone about to share potentially sensitive information. Derek and I have been talking about our own financial assumptions and planning strategies. We realized that watching your approach to wealth management has taught us things about long-term thinking that we'd never considered. Such as living below your means to create choices rather than obligations. Prioritizing personal satisfaction over status displays. Making decisions based on values rather than peer expectations. Derek's list reflected genuine learning rather than superficial observation. Most importantly, Natalie added, understanding that financial security provides freedom to make authentic choices rather than pressure to meet external expectations. The conversation had evolved from their initial shock about my hidden wealth to genuine curiosity about financial philosophy and life planning. They were asking questions about wealth management, investment strategies, and lifestyle design that showed respect for expertise they'd previously overlooked. As we moved to dessert and coffee, I realized how profoundly our family dynamic had shifted. The intervention meetings, accountability programs, and rescue strategies had been replaced by conversations between adults who respected each other's competence and autonomy. I want to propose a toast, I said, raising my wine glass as evening light filtered through my apartment windows. To families who can admit when they're wrong, adjust when they learn something new, and grow stronger through honest communication. To discovering that success comes in forms we don't always recognize, Dad added. To learning that love means trusting someone's judgment rather than trying to improve it, Mom continued. To the patience it takes to let people reveal themselves rather than deciding who they should be, Natalie concluded. The toast reflected transformation that went beyond simple family reconciliation. We'd moved from a dynamic based on hierarchy and assumption to one based on mutual respect and genuine curiosity about each other's lives. The trust fund revelation had been the catalyst, but the real change was deeper, recognition that caring for family members means supporting their authentic choices rather than directing them toward prescribed paths. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, I sat in my quiet apartment with my grandmother's china washed and carefully stored, thinking about the journey from Sunday dinner intervention to celebration of mutual respect. The money had made the revelation possible, but the transformation had required something more valuable, willingness to question assumptions, admit mistakes, and choose understanding over control. My family had learned that my unconventional choices reflected wisdom rather than confusion, that my modest lifestyle demonstrated values rather than limitations, and that my career decisions showed strategic thinking rather than poor judgment. Most importantly, they discovered that the best way to support someone is to ask what they need rather than assume what they're lacking. The story could have ended with dramatic confrontation or bitter recrimination. Instead, it concluded with something more powerful, genuine respect born from honest communication and the recognition that love works best when it trusts rather than tries to fix. If this story of hidden wealth and family assumptions kept you engaged, hit that like button and let me know in the comments what surprised you most about this journey. Was it the trust fund revelation, the family's transformation, or the way financial independence can completely change relationship dynamics? Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about the complex ways money, family, and personal values intersect in our lives. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.